guys. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the new guys that are coming in.
Dude, so
So 2 years ago, our first year doing it was my first time ever seeing Aaron. Watching him on the field with other 6'4"
Hey, the tight end position. Yeah, no best, dude. Just give me the fuck out of here. Fuck this guy. You just signed a deal. Yeah, fuck this.
Okay.
Forgive me. Get me out of here. All right, you're going to the Giants. Deal.
Sounds good.
You just got married to a girl that plays here.
Not care.
Get me. I'm not dealing with this guy anymore. All right. You know, send you to New York. You said, though, on a field of 6'4", 250, feels like the tight end position is another one of those things where at this stage you got to be born into it. You know what I mean? Like in the NBA, you got to have the body to be an NBA guy. Like your body will decide if you're going to make it into the NBA or not. Now, obviously, there's been undersized guys who are 6'3" or 6'2" and things like that have been able to make it because they're skill, and we all know Muggsy Bogues, and we get it, but few and far between. You got to be a big buck. Tight end position has become that way, but you also got to be incredibly athletic. Do you think that this is becoming something that maybe guys would become defensive ends or maybe tackles? Now they're kind of going towards the tight end position because of the growth and how important it is to literally every offense that is successful at this stage.
Yeah, I think there's no question that when, for years, when I first came in the league, 07, there was a handful of elite guys scattered across the league, right? You had Witten, you had Gates, you had Gonzalez. And so but not every team had one. I don't know if half the teams had one, right? And I think a lot of it is exactly what you're saying. Back in the day, if you were 6'5", you either put on a bunch of weight and you went and played defensive end or outside backer, or if you had a real big frame, you became an offensive lineman and you made you a left tackle and you made $1 million, $1 zillion, or you went and played basketball, or you were a power forward, right? So I think there was really no space for guys built like me, right? We weren't big enough to play defensive line or offensive line, but we weren't fast enough or athletic enough to play wide receiver. So 15 years ago, 20 years ago, where did a guy like me play, right? Now, I think every 6'4" high school kid, I think every 6'3" high school point guard that sees the writing on the wall that's probably not going to go. All of a sudden now it's cool to play tight end. All of a sudden now you see Travis Kelce hosting SNL and at the White House, and you see Darren Waller, and you see George Kittle, and you see Gronk over the years. Like, you can be a star and be a tight end, which we haven't really seen across the league with, outside of one or two guys over the last 25 years. And I think that's a big reason there's just more of these body types. There's more of these body types at a younger age, learning skills, learning routes, learning to catch the ball, learning to run. And as a result, now there's a bigger pot to pick from for the NFL. And that's why I think now you look across the league, pretty much every legitimate offense has a dynamic guy at the position.
Yeah, we got Jelani Woods, 6'7", throwing the ball. He's 6'7", you're not. Anyways, go ahead, AJ.
Great. When are they going to start paying these tight ends like it's a premier position, like an edge rusher or something, or shutdown corner or whatever? Are they going to get to that level?
I think they will. I think George and Travis and then Waller came on behind them. They did their part. For a long time, Gronk was the ceiling. Gronk was in that 10 million or so range, but for a long time. And I always say, I told Tony Gonzalez this when I had him on my podcast. I said, the reason tight ends don't get paid a lot is really Tony's fault. For so long, Tony was so much better. He was the premier guy at the position for so long that in the old draft, right? You think back to the draft of me and you, AJ, right? Like back then, and when we all played, the top 5 guys would reset the market for their positions, and it was dominated by defensive ends, quarterbacks, wide receivers. They would become a rookie and the highest paid guy. So now all of a sudden, when that next veteran quarterback or whatever at that position, they had a new mark to beat. Tight ends weren't getting drafted that high, generally speaking, to reset the market. So the market had to be created by veterans. Well, Tony, who was going to make an argument that they should make more money than Tony Gonzalez? there was nobody for a decade. Now all of a sudden, Tony Gonzalez has to negotiate his own contract against himself. So it got stagnant. Then Gronk comes along, resets it. It stays at Gronk for a handful of years. It was only until George and Travis kind of got their opportunity and said, okay, we've reset this market, that they've now put it to where it is. But it's still disproportionately low compared to the other positions, considering the impact. So it's a challenge tight ends have faced. The more good tight ends that come into the league, hopefully the more leapfrogging there is, and maybe it can catch up. It's just there's just not as many as there are. There's 3-4 times as many wide receivers that can just all take turns building the market up. So it's a weird phenomenon, and it's just starting now to people to kind of
like the monkeys do. I know I just killed one.
You're exactly right.
We all know it's Copcat League, monkey see, monkey do. That's kind of how it always works. All the successful
monkey
teams
pee all over you.
So I think that is going to also do well for the market. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be some team that is going to reset the market tight end wise because they're going to be desperate to mimic somebody else, and they're going to pay a tight end that gets to free agency, and boom, it's going to all of a sudden reset it for everybody else. It feels like it's just kind of a slow roll here. And I like the fact that you say, hey, Tony, you're a terrible business person. What the hell? Is it okay, Tony?
No, it was just because he was so good for so long.
Tony, you let this shit happen.
Come on, Tony.
Now you're wearing blankets whenever it's 65 degrees outside. Tony, all right?
Fake gloves on.
All right, Tony, we don't need that, okay? We need you to reset the market every time you're at the negotiation table. But it's not easy to do. A lot easier said than done. But I think nowadays, with the importance and the priority of the tight end position and how it is literally a factor to your team's success.
Yeah.
Kittle matters for the Niners.
Yes.
Travis Kelce matters for the Kansas City Chiefs. Oh, yeah. When it matters, Travis Kelce's getting the ball. Every team seemingly has that weapon that when they need it, they get to it, and it's the tight end position now. Let's take it.
Man, I already got it.
TEU's a good
Wrong,
thing.
dang it.
But TEU's a great thing.
And the last piece to both your points is that very few tight ends make it to free agency. Right, the second they get an opportunity, it's a very risky position injury-wise. Guys get banged up. It's physical. Quarterbacks can, they can roll the dice. Kirk Cousins can roll the dice year after year after year to make it to free agency. Quarterbacks are a little more protected. Their injury rate's not as high. Tight ends, I mean, we see these guys. They get obliterated. They get ankles. They get feet. They got all sorts of stuff. So when all of a sudden they get back, you name it, they get.
Dang it! I should have killed that bear.
Let's get a lot of these right here.
I was the prime example of that. I never had an opportunity to ever be a free agent in my prime. I never even attempted to take the risk. When I got to 1 year left on the deal, we said we want an extension. And we always knew we were never going to pass the top. We were always going to be in that 2, 3, 4 range. I was good with that because I was playing. I can't risk blowing out my knee this year for free that, and then I'm a free agent. I make nothing. So it's just the nature of the position.
It's all right. It's going to grow.
Yeah, here we go. We're going to be great. We're going to be great.
Pac-Man has a question before you grow.
Agree.
Amen.
I watch Kittle, and he just decapitate people as far as blocking. So how do y'all come up with who's going to win? I know you say everybody's going to vote. Like, how many people going to be there that vote? How many of the top guys that's going to be there? What's going into it? Is it just catching the ball? Is it just having the best record? Because there's a lot of guys that don't get the recognition. And me, personally, I think Kittle is the best tight end in the league because he can do it blocking and he can run routes. So I was just asking, like, what's coming into play of how we picking this guy?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I think from the standpoint of what's being asked, nobody in the NFL is asked to do what George Kittle gets asked to do. He is a force in the passing game. For what he's asked to do from a lead block perspective and on the ball, he's handling defensive ends, running pass by himself. There is nobody that's asked to do what he does and then say, oh, by the way, you got to play every snap. And you got to go out there and you got to be, he's been a 1,000-yard producer over the years. So I agree with you. I think if you voted for Kittle, no one would blame you. I think if you vote for Kelsey, no one would blame you. I think there's a small handful of guys that you could justify your argument. I think the reason why, especially for the first year, why a guy like Travis is so unique, for Travis to have 7 years in a row over 1,000 yards, and prior, humble brag, it was 3. I just think for a position, we just talked about work. that he's putting on display as far as touchdowns, 100-yard games, dominating performances, winning the Super Bowl this year. Like, when you stack it all up, I never thought in 9 years anybody would ever reach the level of Tony Gonzalez. His numbers, his production, his longevity was just so in outer space compared to everybody else. No one even really considered it. Everyone was like, oh, there's Tony, and then I'm going to fight to be in that next group. Travis is probably the first guy that's come along that has shown that, knock on wood, he has the longevity.